Conflict is part of the human condition this side of the fall. I mean, Jesus even said this. He said, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. Now, that sounds like the opposite of what he says in Matthew chapter 5. But what he's saying is he came to reveal the true condition. There's a lot of false peace around us. There's a lot of accepting of the status quo around us. And so Jesus says, I came to bring a sword. What he means by that is I came to actually reveal the division so that we can bring peace. And not just accept this surface level togetherness. All right, open up your Bibles, whatever form of Bible you brought with you, to Matthew chapter 5. If you've been with us, we've been in the Gospel of Mark, and we are going to continue to be in the Gospel of Mark. But we are going to take the next 6 weeks, and we're going to pause our journey through the Gospel of Mark. Because one of the things that we do here at Wingfoot is we have what we call a community rule of life, which I'm going to explain in just a couple minutes, but it's oriented around 6 practices from the life of Jesus to say if we're going to follow Jesus, following is not just a head activity, it's a life activity. And so we're looking over the next 6 weeks at one of those practices, the practice of peacemaking. If you were with us in May, we walked through the practice of pace. This time we're going to walk through the practice of peacemaking and try to teach through all 6 of these over the course of 2-ish years, depending on how the calendar falls. So if you would turn your attention to Matthew chapter 5, we're going to read, and then we're going to dive in. Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 10. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. This is God's word for us this morning. A few months ago, an organization called the Global Peace Index, which you may not know of, that's okay, I only discovered them recently, but they try to quantify conflict in the world. Which you can imagine is quite the task. But they're a nonpartisan group that's just trying to get a sense of what actually is happening in the world of war and conflict and things like that. And they released their annual report that began with this statement, the world is at a crossroads, which is like kind of an ominous thing for a global peace organization to say. But they discovered that there is the highest number of countries engaged in armed conflict right now since World War II. 92 countries right now are currently involved in armed conflicts at or beyond their borders. That has resulted in 110 million people who are currently refugees or internally displaced because of these conflicts. And last year, 162,000 people, they estimate, died in armed conflict, the highest number in over 30 years. And you can probably think of the conflicts that are a lot of those. We think of the things that we hear in the news, Gaza and Ukraine. And also places that we don't hear as much about, Sudan and Ethiopia. Here at home, there was a survey done a couple months ago, and they found that 20% of both Democrats and Republicans agree with the statement that it is sometimes acceptable to use violence to achieve your political ends. 20% of both left and right. Gun violence here in the United States is now the leading cause of death among children under the age of 18. Higher than car accidents, higher than disease, higher than smoking. We felt this close to home. If you live here in the neighborhood, you probably felt the mass shooting on Kelly Avenue back in July, or the shooting on Morning View Avenue. If you're connected to some families in Stowe, you felt the loss of Megan Kellerman this past weekend. We feel that. in a lot of different ways. Currently in our homes, 43% of marriages end in divorce, with the average stint being about 8 years. 8 years is about as long as those folks make it. And most of us, if we took time to just think about our relationships, most of us could probably identify a relationship or two that we used to have, that we really treasured, that we were really close with someone, a family member or a friend or a neighbor. And now as you think about that relationship, you realize that it's been a long time since you talked. Maybe there's some words that were exchanged. Maybe there's some conflict that came up. And so you just kind of decided to part ways. Most of us can probably think of at least one person, probably more than that, especially in the past couple of years. You see, we're living in a time that desperately needs Jesus' way of peacemaking. All of these things are symptoms of a world that is obsessed with and dominated by conflict, division, and violence. So over the next 6 weeks, we're going to look at how Jesus, in a violent world that he lived in, how he addressed peacemaking through the lens of the kingdom of heaven and the heart of God that he came to teach us about. Peacemaking is one of the 6 practices of our rule of life. If you're new to Wingfoot Church, that might sound scary to you. You might hear, okay, rules for my life. That's not how it works. A rule of life, I like to think about it in 2 different ways. One is a trellis. If you planted tomato plants a couple months ago, you probably have a lot of tomatoes right now. And you probably have a trellis or a framework that is helping to support all those tomatoes, unless you had a really terrible year. It was really dry. You don't have as many tomatoes as you had hoped. But a trellis provides structure for that plant to grow. The trellis itself is not the growth. The trellis itself is not the plant. The plant, the life, is the fruit that grows around that structure. Another way to think about it is training wheels. Training wheels for any kid learning or adult learning to ride a bike. The point is not to ride the training wheels. The point is to learn the center balance that you need to ride on 2 wheels. In a similar way, a rule of life is a way to learn that God's love is always with us in Jesus. And I can walk in confidence in light of that love as I live this life out through a certain set of practices. And so peacemaking is one of these things. And the goal of this is not to do the thing and then get God to love me. That's not how God and the gospel work. Rather, the goal is to understand the love that God has for me in Jesus, the life that he wants me to live through the power of the Holy Spirit, and then to walk in obedience out of that love. Whenever you get that flipped and you say, I do these things, and so therefore God owes me, you're not operating out of the way of Jesus. And so today, as we begin over the next 6 weeks exploring the practice of peacemaking, I just want to orient us to Jesus' way of peacemaking here in Matthew chapter 5. And so we're going to look at just 3 things. And so if you're easily distracted by all the beautiful nature or the bugs that are biting you right now or the kids that are clamoring for your attention, here's the 3 things that we're going to hang on to. And it's going to be shorter. This is not my 45-minute sermon. This is just going to be a couple things. All right, so first we're going to look at what peacemaking is and what it isn't in Jesus' way, what peacemaking is and what it isn't. Second, what it takes to be a peacemaker, what it takes to be a peacemaker. And then third, why peacemaking is an essential practice in the way of Jesus. Why it's not optional, but essential. So first, let's talk about what peacemaking is. This may seem fairly obvious, but peacemaking is not peacekeeping. And peacekeeping is not peacemaking. The prophet Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 6, he said this, they have treated my people's brokenness superficially, claiming peace, peace, when there is no peace. There's an approach to peace that says, I'm just going to not rock the boat. I'm going to accept the status quo. Even if it's not actually peace, I will settle for a superficial peace or a false peace. I'll give you some examples of what false peace is. False peace is appeasing someone while I ignore my own feelings. Or as we might say, a people pleaser. False peace is applying quick fixes to deep issues in order to move on. False peace is altering the truth in order to avoid a confrontation. False peace is allowing for inequity and injustice so long as we benefit from it. False peace is avoiding people who are different than us because that's too hard. These all look like peace on the surface, but if you were to actually get beneath the surface, you'd see we're actually avoiding conflict or we're internalizing conflict. And oftentimes what leads to then is resentment and bitterness, and it comes out anyway, one way or another. Instead, Jesus invites us into peacemaking. Here in his teaching, peacemaking is a compound word. There's 2 words smushed together. The first word is peace, which in the Greek is eirene, which is connected to the Old Testament word shalom. Shalom is harmony, it's togetherness, it's security, it's everything fitting. We're going to explore this more next week as we look at the theology of shalom, but it is rooted in the idea of how God made the world to be an Eden. Peace is God's way enacted in our world. The second word, making, is the Greek word poieo, which means to make or to produce, to prepare or to render. It's an active action word. It could also be translated practice. So in other words, Jesus said, blessed are the peace practitioners, the people who do peace and make peace. So peacemaking in Jesus' way is working towards the wholeness and the restoration and the reconciliation across all levels of God's creation, cultivating and creating shalom everywhere we go. Where there is discord, we lean in. Where there is division, we seek to reconcile. Where there is brokenness, we seek to heal. That's what peacemaking in Jesus' way means. So then the second question, what does it take to be a peacemaker? We might hear peacemaking and we might quickly go to the idea of passivity. Even that idea of being a pacifist sounds passive, right? Where I'm going to let evil happen. I'm not going to fight back if someone comes at me. I'm not going to stop someone if they break into my house. That's what we tend to think of these caricatures of what peacemaking actually is. But that's not the case in Jesus' teaching here in the Sermon on the Mount. Just look at a couple things that Jesus has said in the verses right before this, if you have it in front of you. Notice Jesus said, blessed are the meek. Meekness is not weakness. Meekness is not passivity. Jesus is described as being weak, and yet none of us would describe Jesus is described as being meek, but none of us would describe Jesus as being weak. Meekness is having the power to do something, and yet choosing to set aside that power or to restrain that power for the greater good. Right? And so I might have the power to punch you in the face. Meekness is saying, I'm not going to. I might have the power to fight back, but meekness is saying, I want to pursue a greater good than just me winning. And so meekness is knowing your power and knowing what you could do, but choosing to set that aside for the sake of something greater. And so peacemaking is not being passive and saying, well, I'm just going to let evil reign and wait until the kingdom of God comes. Peacemaking is leaning in and saying, what power do I have and how can I use that to create peace while not destroying someone? That's what Dr. King said in Strength to Love. Only through an inner spiritual transformation do we gain the strength to fight vigorously the evils of this world in a humble and loving spirit. His point was that peacemaking takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of strength to do these things. Notice Jesus also said, blessed are the merciful. To be merciful means that I could punish you and I could be just in my punishment, but I'm going to choose to extend forgiveness. This is what God does to us in Jesus. He is merciful towards us when we deserve punishment. Peacemaking is not content until the enemy becomes a friend. And that takes a lot of strength and a lot of power and a lot of patience. It's not about winning the battle if you lose the person along the way. And that's a pretty radical notion, right? A lot of our ideas about peacemaking and conflict in our world are about the good guys winning and the bad guys losing. And so the good guys need to be stronger than the bad guys. We need to vanquish them. We need to destroy them so that good wins. But Jesus instead calls us to something better and harder and deeper, to actually win over our enemies like he won us over. That's why Jesus says right after this, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. There's an expectation that it's going to be difficult. There's an expectation that people are going to misunderstand you or misrepresent you or come at you because of the things that you do or believe. But Jesus says, know that when that happens, and it will, the kingdom of heaven is already yours. It's already won for you in Jesus. And so there's not a fear or a gripping on to control, but rather there's a trust that says when someone comes at me because of following the way of Jesus, I know that my status is secure. And so all these things help us understand that peacemaking is actually this active leaning in that is hard, that does take a lot of strength. It's not the easiest route. Right? Sometimes the easiest route seems like just punching you in the face and going home. Or I'm going to take my ball and go home. Or I'm going to take my people and I'm going to go over here and you guys go over there. Peacemaking is hard, but it's the way of Jesus. And so let me just give you 3 reasons why it's an essential practice in your discipleship with Jesus. For many of us, peacemaking is probably kind of a third level thing or a fourth level thing. Like you may have argued with people about it in college, and that's the last time you thought about it in the way of Jesus. All right, but peacemaking in the way of Jesus is an essential practice. We tend to think of it in terms of like between us and God. God makes peace with us in Jesus, and he does. Or maybe even between us and the people in my community group. We live at peace. There's no conflict here. But we oftentimes stop there and we say, okay, peacemaking is just about me and God and me and the person next to me. But Jesus has this broader vision for peacemaking that is about making the whole world right again. Making the whole broken creation shalom again. And so he calls us to not just be peacemakers between us and God and us and people, but us in creation. Us and the systems around us and the injustice around us. All of this is wrapped up in the idea of shalom. So let me just give you 3 reasons why peacemaking is essential. First, conflict is inevitable. I don't know if you've realized this, but like conflict is part of life. And I don't like it. Most of us don't like it. If you do like it, you probably should explore that a little bit. And Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble. Conflict is part of the human condition this side of the fall. I mean, Jesus even said this. He said, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. Now, that sounds like the opposite of what he says in Matthew chapter 5. But what he's saying is he came to reveal the true condition. There's a lot of false peace around us. There's a lot of accepting of the status quo around us. And so Jesus says, I came to bring a sword. What he means by that is I came to actually reveal the division so that we can bring peace. And not just accept this surface level togetherness. And so conflict is inevitable. And conflict, as we lean into it, we begin to see what's actually going on here. And so the warning is this. As we talk about peacemaking, over the next couple of weeks, it's probably not going to feel very peaceful. Because when you actually lean into peacemaking, the first thing that you have to do is you have to lean into conflict. Because for a lot of us, we have kind of a peace up here, but there's a lot of division and discord over here. And so we kind of stay up here with ourselves, we stay up here with God, we stay up here with other people, and we say, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. Are you okay with that? Yeah, that's fine. Right? If you're old enough to remember Friends, you remember Ross saying, I'm fine. He wasn't really fine. I know that dates me as a millennial, but whatever. But this is why, right, when we talk about peacemaking, and you look at like protests, or you look at kind of confrontation of evil and injustice, right? It looks like it's not peacemaking, but actually it might be peacemaking. Because it has to reveal, we have to deal with the actual reality of how things are, and not just settle for the status quo. This is why Dr. King, in Letter from Birmingham Jail, which is one of the recommended readings that we have for this series, he said this when pastors were asking him, why protest? He said this, why direct action, why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? That's what people were asking him. He said this, nonviolent, direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks to so dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. What he's saying is his direct action in the civil rights movement was not creating conflict, it was revealing the conflict that was already there. And that's true at that level, that's true in our relationships too. Like if you want to lean into peacemaking, the reality is the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have to fight. And that's why most of us avoid it. And so over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about some things that might be difficult, that might rub you the wrong way. Maybe as you get into community and you talk through this, like you're going to realize you actually have some differences. That is part of the process. And so as you begin to feel conflict, right, know that something is not going wrong, something might in fact be going right. Second reason why why peacemaking is an essential practice in the way of Jesus. How we deal with conflict reveals the true condition of our heart. How we deal with conflict reveals the true condition of our heart. It's just a balloon. Right, like this, when you're in that fight with your friend or a spouse, you are not operating out of the rational part of your brain. You're operating out of something back here or something down here, right? You say things and 10 minutes later after you've calmed down, you realize what you said and you're like, oof. Conflict reveals what's actually in us in our default mode. This is why James 4 says this, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? saying the reason why we have conflict is actually because there's some deeply unformed or malformed places in our interior life that Jesus has not yet touched. And so I need to lean into peacemaking so that Jesus can bring the transformation at the deepest levels of who I am. When I fight, I'm not thinking about the 3 bullet points of theology that I believe about fighting. I'm oftentimes operating out of the family of origin that I grew up in and how we dealt with conflict. Right? We first learned conflict not from a conflict management seminar, but from how your parents fought, or how they didn't fight, or if they fought but you didn't see it. The things that you talked about at home and the things that you didn't talk about at home. Whether there was a lot of intense emotion or no emotion at all, we learn how to deal with conflict first in our gut, not in our head. And so leaning into peacemaking is us participating in the deep formation of our interior lives that Jesus wants to do so that we can become true peacemakers. Lastly, why it's essential. How we make peace demonstrates our understanding of the gospel. Notice what Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." That when we make peace in this way, people look at us and they will see that we are following a particular kind of God. A God who is in himself a peacemaker. A God who sent Jesus to us in meekness and in humility to die for our sins. As Paul would say, to make us his friends when we were his enemies. And so the heart of the gospel is peacemaking. And so oftentimes we believe that theologically, but we have not embraced that in our practice. To actually love our enemies like Jesus loved us when we were his enemies. And so peacemaking is essential because it is us living out the gospel in our relationships, and in our communities, and in our neighborhoods, and our world. And so it is not optional. It will be difficult. But on the other side, we will begin to see the reconciling power of Jesus at work in our interior lives, in our home lives, in our community lives, in our city, and our world, if we are willing to participate with Jesus in this. All right, so let me just give you an overview of where we're going to go the next couple weeks, and then I have 3 tangible things that you can do. All right, so next week we're going to look at the theology of shalom. What is this idea of peace and how God created our world? Then we're going to look at practicing forgiveness. What does it look like to make peace through forgiveness? We're going to look at how do we make peace in the wake of violence. When our world is violent, what does it look like to lean in as peacemakers? We're going to take a week and we're going to talk about how we make peace through the practices of community development. Actually leaning in and causing our neighborhood, working to the thriving and flourishing of our neighborhood. Then we're going to take 1 week and we're going to talk about making peace in our intense political divisions. So as you can imagine, it's going to be a little bit of a spicy series, as Cameron would say. It's a little spicy. We're going to talk about some things, and you may disagree, and that's okay. Because the point of this is to lean in and say, what are we called to? And how do we do this? All right, so just 3 things for you to do. There is a practice guide that we have put together for this week and for every week of the series that is available on our website, wingfootchurch.com/peacemaking. But in the back of your handout, there are 3 QR codes. And each one of these is a step that you can take to lean into this. All right? And they kind of go maybe beginner, intermediate, hard, if you will. So kind of wherever you are in your journey, you can take a step. The first invitation is to step into a reading plan, a 12-day reading plan called Patterns of Peace. This will look at the teachings in the life of Jesus, how he modeled and taught peacemaking, but then it also kind of puts alongside that some teachings from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the practices of the civil rights movement. If you've studied the civil rights movement, the 60s, the name and the way of Jesus is all over it. Fingerprints of Christians are all over that movement. So we'll see that in aspects of his life and teaching. So that's the first step. The second step is to do a conflict style assessment. So there's a 30-question assessment that you can take. Just gives you kind of choose this or choose this, and out of that you'll have 1 of 5 conflict styles that says this is your default approach to conflict. Again, just a way for you to begin to say, okay, this is how I usually deal with conflict. I'll give you pros and cons, and it'll just at least give you a starting point for you to know, okay, when conflict arises, this is what I typically do. If you're married, it'd be a good thing to do together and say, how does this actually play out in our dynamics? In your community groups, it'd be a good thing to share around your group because that's probably already in play. The last step, if you want to take this step, is to explore your family of origin through a family genogram. If you've gone through emotionally healthy spirituality, you've done this. I walk every couple that I do premarital counseling with through this because it just helps you see, okay, what was normal in my family? What did we fight about? What did we not fight about? What was the emotional temperature of my family? It's a worksheet that will walk you through that practice to just better understand how you learned conflict before anyone ever set you down to do a conflict management seminar. So you can better then understand, this is where I'm coming from, and so this is what growth would look like in the way of Jesus. All right. All that is available, wingfootchurch.com/6p or the back of your bulletin this morning. But I'm excited for this. We're going to lean in, and we're going to trust that Jesus is going to do some things. And those things might be a little conflicty. That's okay, because he wants to make peace.